Connected external microphone. System sound volume set to 100%.
Hello everyone, this is voice note 4 and we will continue with the introduction to poetry and we'll start now from 1900. You see, the first major development from our point of view occurs in about 1910. A group of poets called Imagists came into being. Emmy Lowell, A-M-Y, Emmy Lowell, 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 was one of the representative poets of this school of poetry. That is why Imagism sometimes came to be called as Amigism, instead of Imagism. Now, this school of poetry, in fact, believed in presenting images only, raw images, and invited the reader to draw the meaning. Sorry. For example, you may have studied Walt Soyinka's telephone conversation last session. It contains so many images. For example, spectroscopic flight of fancy, or images like, are you very light or dark, or are you dark or very light, and so on. These poets, in fact, abstain from making statements. So there was an extreme form of imagism which is known as vorticism. 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 And the only poet of this school was Ezra Pound, Ezra, Ezra Pound of America. So these two important developments took place before World War I. Now, after World War I, there was a major development. There came into being a group of poets known as the Modernists. This group consisted of two great poets of 20th century, and maybe, one of the two all-time greats. That is these two poets, T.S. Eliot, E-L-I-O-T, Eliot, and W.B. Yeats, Y-E-A-T-S, Yeats. Yeats is in our course, and both these poets may perhaps be ranked as as two of the greatest poets of all time. In fact, Yeats was awarded the Nobel Prize of Poetry as well. Now, these poets, in fact, used myths and symbols in their poetry. For them, the deepest things came from the unconscious. You see, our mind is divided amongst the three categories: conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. That which we remember clearly is the part of the conscious mind, and that which we partly remember as a faded memory comes under subconscious mind. जैसे मिसाल के तौर पे आपको कुछ थोड़ा बहुत याद तो हो, ऐसा लग रहा है जैसे शाम का वक्त था, कोई वाक़या हुआ था, क्या हुआ था याद नहीं है, उस वक्त कोई बात हुई, वो बात आपको हल्की हल्की याद है, वो आपके मेमोरी में आ रही है, लेकिन ये सारा कुछ क्लियर नहीं है, ब्लर्ड है, कंफ्यूजिंग है. So this is subconscious. And then there is the unconscious, that which you don't remember at all, but that keeps on affecting your thinking and behavior. Right from our childhood, we keep collecting things in our unconscious, which affects our behavior as well as our thinking, our attitude. So, for the for the modernists, the deepest things came from unconscious. Laid emphasis on the study of dreams, revealing the unconscious mind, and a lot of use of imagery, symbols, and myths. They explored reality, hidden reality. That is, try to find out as to what can be there in the unconscious mind of the man. They dealt with personal intellectual problems, and one of the very representative poems of this era is Wasteland, one word, Wasteland, by T.S. Eliot. In this, he used the myth of rebirth, death and rebirth pattern. Well, we will talk about Yeats more. Yeats was haunted by various dilemmas, and one of the dilemma was the contrast between youth and age. He always wondered as to why it happens that when we are young, we do not have that much of wisdom, and when we are old, we do have experience and wisdom, but the energy and vitality of the youth disappears. So his poetry very much reflects that. Now, after that, we have Post-Modernist, which followed the modernist in a way, but in a slightly different way. Their poetry was completely based on unconscious and dream. Poets like Dylan Thomas, D-Y-L-I-N, D-Y-L-I-N, sorry, Dylan Thomas. And then there was Spender and Auden, Spender and Auden, Auden. You have studied one poem by W.H. Auden, that is Refugee Blues. We are German Jews, my dear, we are German Jews. So, these poets, in their early poetry, followed communism or Marxism. There was a progressive writers movement all over the world, in different literatures. There was a progressive writers movement. In Urdu, we call it Taraqi Pasand Tehreek. In Hindi, it's known as Pragatishil Andolan. The poets and writers of this era focused on the problems of the common man. That is, the poor man, for example, who doesn't get enough to eat. They said that it's no use talking about dreams or intellectual problems when there is so much of poverty and hunger and exploitation and all that. So, you will study one poem by Spender in core course this particular session, an elementary classroom school in a slum. Now, sorry, these poets, both Spender and Auden, towards the end of their career, they disowned Marxism. They deviated from Marxism and communism, and they shunned it, avoided it, stopped believing in Marxism. And they too started focusing on philosophical problems. Well, dear students, this was the time about 1970. After that, in between this, there is another movement which is worth talking about, and there is a poet like Philip Larkin, Phlip Larkin, Philip Larkin. You've studied one poem by him, Coming, The Coming of Spring. Now, this group of poets is called movement poets. They laid emphasis on expressing their thoughts clearly, logically, in a terse, plain manner, unlike the modernists who use myths, symbols, allusions, and so on. It was a reaction against modernism, that is, modernist poetry, and they believed in expressing their views and thoughts in a clear-cut manner. So these were major trends and movements up to 1970. After that, of course, we have feminism and some other movements which are not fully glossed or matured. If not fully analyzed, there are poets like Adrian Rich, which we will study in core course, and other 21st century poet. You see, which don't have much relevance to our course, so we'll skip that. We also have some of the Commonwealth poets in our course, like Kamala Das. You will study one poem by her in elective English and one in core course. A.K. Ramanujan, who was an Indian poet and settled in America. So some Commonwealth poets also, an American poetess as well, that is Emily Dickinson. Her era was the time of Romanticism in England, though she is not a romantic poet. Um, now we have covered introduction to English poetry. Um, you see, in the next voice note, which is going to be a brief one, I'll tell you how to understand poetry, how to understand a poem. That is, when you study prose and when you study poetry, there is some difference in approaching the two. So in the next voice note, I'll talk about that, and then we can come to our poem. So, for the time being, uh, this is just all from me, and uh, all on introduction to poetry. So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Pause button.